has broken like the first morning. Blackbird has spoken like the first bird. Praise for the singing, praise for the morning, praise for them springing fresh from the world. Sweet the rain's new fall, sunlit from heaven, like the first dew fall on the fast grass. Praise for the sweetness of the wet garden, sprung in completeness where his feet pass. Mine is the sunlight, mine is the morning, born of the one light Eden saw play. Praise with elation, praise every morning, God's recreation of the new day. Morning has broken like the first morning. Blackbird has spoken like the first bird. Praise for the singing, praise for the morning, praise for them springing fresh from the world.
Today's reading from Corinthians 13. If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have the faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give all my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil but rejoice with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails, but when there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when completeness comes, it'll be what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known, And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. Sung Myung Moon. The 21st century shall be a century of righteousness. It will be a century of spirit and soul, when wealth will not be the dominating factor. It will be a country when God and human beings live together as one. A new awareness will come to every person that living for the sake of others has eternal value, for greater than living for oneself. In the 21st century, selfishness will decline. The altruistic value of interdependence, mutual prosperity, and universally shared values will be triumphant. Thank you.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Okay. Happy Parents' Day. How many of you are parents here? Raise your hand. Proudly. We are proud parents of our children. I wanted to start off by asking you, first of all, what kind of problems is America facing today? What kind of problems do we have in our country? Relationship problems. What else? That's all? Divorce, money problems, violence, injustice, racial tensions, apathy. Okay, we have a whole wide range of things, some kind of more internal, some external. But nobody really mentioned, what's the root of all these problems? Family breakdown. That's what I want to talk to you about today. When it comes down to it, really it's the problem of divorce, which someone said, and also resulting family breakdown that has led to all the myriad problems that we see in America and actually in much of the world today. And is why, I put the Hyundai this morning, talked about love, right? Love. And that's something that Paul wrote 2,000 years ago. But how much love do we have in our country today? What's the reason for that? Because people do not grow up in loving environments, in loving families. I've been fortunate over the past year or so to be involved with CARP. How many of you are CARP members? Who's it? Good. Mrs. Baines? And eternal students. What? It's great. You're young spirit. So, and I hope I have a young spirit too. So I was invited to be part of the CARP board and to contribute in the area of education for CARP. So CARP is on the road to revival. It's growing and developing. More chapters are being established every year. But one of the things that has been lacking is a good education program for CARP members to use on their campuses. What will they say to students? So of course, we can witness and give direct divine principle, but at the same time, as a student organization, it should be able to address issues that are affecting America today, that are affecting students' lives, affecting the environment that we live in, from a principled viewpoint, the application of the principle. So over the past year or so, myself and several other people on a team, since last summer, we have been developing various presentations. Actually, Leon Eaton is one of them. Is she here today? So I want you all to pretend that you are CARP Eaton students. Was part of the team. Mrs. Baines, first and second generation. Is a CARP student. So we've developed look at several presentations on of a worldview of a about the past now 500 years of human history since the time of the Renaissance and Reformation. Also, why did I call this the elephant in the room? What do you think? What is the elephant in the room? Education, and about the media, the role of the media. Right, something nobody talks about, and impact. Actually, if you look at, if you go online, you read all the different stories, events that are happening everywhere, all the problems, all the shootings, all the violence, all the stuff that we see. How much is it mentioned that this is due to family breakdown? Very little. The root cause is very rarely mentioned. This is the elephant in the room that America and the world needs to address. And we know, as Unification Church members, that this really is the root of the problem. So I want to go through some of these things with you. So I'm show you some statistics, and I think we're aware of these kinds of things, but we may not be aware specifically. Okay, I'm already up there, right? Rise in divorce. I've been reading the book lately by William Bennett. Anybody know William Bennett? He's a former Secretary of Education and also drug czar. And in this book, he mentions that the scale of marital breakdown in the West since 1960 has no historical precedent. What we have seen since 1960 till today is an absolute transformation of our society and the values governing our society. And divorce is reflective of this. So back in the 50s, before the sexual revolution of the 60s, divorce was rare. Most families held together. They may not necessarily have been happy, but they stayed together, and they tried to work things out, and they were committed to each other, husband and wife. But we see today that, divorce has become almost like acceptable, it's just so rampant common that everybody that's just the way it is. But if you think about it, these statistics, every one of these divorces represents a failure. Who gets married expecting to divorce? Nobody, right? When you marry, you have hopes and dreams for the future, for your family, living together, having children, and establishing a loving, happy family. The tragedy is that half of these marriages basically end up in divorce and failure. And as a result of this, over the past 50 years now, many of the children of these families, they don't want to get married. Why should we get married and have the same thing happen to us that happened to our parents? We're not interested. And so we've seen the marriage rates declining over these past 50, 60 years. Today, less than half of all adults are married. That's unprecedented in modern society. And instead, young people choose to live together without marrying. So we see as the marriage rates have declined and divorce has risen, that also cohabitation also has been rising steadily over these past 50, 60 years. Today, 9 million couples, probably more, this is 2016, 9 million couples are living together without being married. And statistics show that out of the cohabiting couples, only about 1/6 of them last more than 3 years. 1/10 lasts 5 years or more. So these are basically temporary relationships, temporary situations. So that in itself is not good, but is compounded by the fact that these couples, even though they are not committed to each one another and eventually break up, they have children. So more and more children today are being born outside of wedlock. Especially in Europe, very rampant, and in America also, it has been climbing steadily year by year. So, this is now 41%, approaching 50% of all children in America are born out of wedlock, and which means that they are living and growing up in a very unstable family environment. So what are the quality of these children's lives? It has been shown 67% of these children witnessed their parents breaking up by the age of 12. Married couples also, 25% of married couples also witnessed the breakup of their parents, but far more of cohabiting couples. And naturally, this is going to have a negative impact on their future lives. Studies have shown that children of divorced or single parents have more emotional problems. They have anger issues, resentment issues. They're more delinquent, leading eventually to criminal activity in many cases. They're more likely to drop out of school. They're more likely to abuse, to grow up in poverty, and to abuse sex, alcohol, and drugs. All these problems are the result of a very unstable childhood and living in a situation where they feel neglect and abused. And so, more statistics pile on you that these children are 5 times more likely to live in poverty. They're 3 times more likely to have children out of wedlock themselves, and twice as likely to drop out of school. In addition, it has been shown that 72% of teenage murderers grew up without a father. 70% of long-term prisoners today also grew up without a father, and 60% of rapists grew up without a father. So we see here the impact of not having a father around in the family and growing up in a single-parent home, which usually is the mother. And then in terms of the financial situation, unmarried families tend to be much poorer than married families are across all racial levels. We see here very clearly the impact of not being married, growing up in a single-parent home, unstable, and so committing the children to also growing up in impoverished situations. So all of this should give us pause to really realize, that this has been a tragedy that has afflicted American society over these past 60 years or so. And it should be easy to make a case for marriage, don't you think? It should be easy to do that. The fact is that actually, even though many young people today, so-called millennials, for example, who are between 18 and 36 today, how many of you are between 18 and 36? Are you married? Millennials tend not to want to get married, as we said before. They're not inspired seeing the example of their own parents. However, despite this, 2/3 of them still plan or eventually want to get married someday. So, because this is nature, this is ingrained in us to want to find your partner in life. So, even though we see so many divorces and failures in marriage, that cannot be taken out of us. Every person wants to find someone that they love, that can live together with, and have a family with. This is ingrained in us. So what are some of the personal benefits of marriage? So we look at it. This is all based on research. Those who are married tend to live longer. They're more healthy. They are happier. And they tend to have more inner growth. Their spiritual growth is better. They're more well-adjusted. They tend to be more responsible, much more mature. In addition, again, as we've seen, married couples tend to be more well-off financially. They're more resilient. They can meet life's hardships better. You know, as husband and wife, they can support one another going through difficulties together. And they tend to be more productive. They tend to be, living naturally as if they live for each other, they live for their children. They have this kind of natural tendency to want to do things for a greater purpose than just simply themselves. And a nuclear family of father, mother, and children is still today a child's best guarantee for success. So we know that, right? Especially growing up in the Unification Church, we know that. And for us, marriage, family is central to who we are. So I want to talk a little bit more about, I've given some reasons here, some personal benefits of marriage. But let's go a little bit more internally. What is it that family does for us? What is really the value of family? So Father's talked about the family as a school of love, a place where our hearts and character is nurtured, a primary training ground for relationships. Over the past, we just finished a 40-day condition, right? Many of you went out and blessed many couples. Why do we do that? Because you're supposed to, right? That's what we've been asked to do, and your mother has given us a goal of 1 million couples by 2020. But my question is, all these couples that we may be blessing, what happens to them afterwards? Are they going to really be an example for our country, for our society? Or they just sort of disappear, float away, we never see them again, we have no idea what they're doing? Are they themselves going to get divorced, even after they were blessed by us? Are they going to be good at raising their children? So I'm concerned as an educator about, education of married couples, blessed couples, that they can really be an example for others. This is my concern. And if we really want to regenerate a marriage culture in America, we have to give people good reasons to do so, to realize the benefits. So we've seen a lot of we see the statistics here and what happens when families break down, but is that enough to motivate people to really make the investment which is required to really make a marriage work and a family work? So we have to help people to understand really more insight internally the value of marriage and family. So again, the family is a place where we have lots of relationships going on. Okay? So I grew up in a family of 11 kids. 11, not myself, but I had 11 brothers and sisters. My wife has 10 brothers and sisters. When my father answered the phone, he would often say, Grand Central Station, because there's always noise in the house. And when I was a kid, I used to we had a little camper in the backyard. That was my sanctuary. I would go out there, and I would lock the door, and nobody could bother me. One place I could go that had some peace and quiet. So, but anyway, a family is a place where you're surrounded by all these people, and not of your own choosing, right? You didn't choose your brothers and sisters. You didn't choose your parents. You didn't even choose your own children, right? You got what you got. So our task is what's given to us, how can we make good relationships with these people? And so in the process, it's helping us to, when we go out into the society, then we then bring what we've learned in the family into our relationships with one another out in the society. So we see here in a family there are all kinds of relationships. And basically speaking, we can say there are the vertical relationships between people of different generations, and then horizontal relationships between those of the same generation. Okay, husband and wife, and brothers and sisters, same generation. But then we have our relationships with our parents, our grandparents, and as we know from Ancestor Liberation, we have many others back there, right? Going back thousands of years even. And in one sense, they are also part of our family. We may not see them, but they are around. And they, as we know, want to be liberated. They want to be blessed themselves. So what we see here is just what we see on earth, the physical family on earth, but there's a lot more. And where our families came from, came, as we know, from our ancestors. So in talking about the family as a school of love, Fathers, we know, has a very profound teaching about how is the family a school of love. Okay? Very profound and far-reaching that, maybe people have sort of understood, but never really spelled it out as clearly as True Father did. So we know about the 4 realms of heart, right? Or we can also call the 4 spheres of love. So I want to go through this. What are these 4 spheres of love? And this is the way that the family functions as a school of love. So the first sphere that we experience as we come into this world is from the position of a child. All of us were little babies at one point, right? You remember? No. But you were. I promise you, you were. You were a baby, even though I was not there, but you were. And the first relationships that we have in our life is probably mostly with our mother, through that maternal, and if our mother's breastfeeding us, then we have a very intimate relationship with our mother. And then our father hopefully is around too, and also giving his love to us. So our parents function, the most important people in our lives. We are literally, absolutely dependent on them, right, for our life. We could not survive without our parents. So they are the center of our world those first few years of life. And the nature of that relationship determines in many ways very deeply what kind of people we will become. So studies have shown the first 3 years of our life is the time where 50% of our personality is formed for our entire life. So it's such a tragedy if our parents are not there. Or one of our parents is not there, then already we are being scarred. So we know, if you've had children, little children, I can remember my children when they were small. Yeah, really, I was the center of their life. If I came home from a long day at work, it's like, God has come. God has arrived at home. And they run up to you and they embrace you and Daddy's home, Daddy's home. Of course, when they're teenagers, it's a little bit different, but still, it shows the appreciation that's there, that central relationship, vertical relationship with the parents. And so that is in response, because if you feel love from your parents, you naturally will respond to that. So this kind of love, this stage of life is a very responsive love, where you're responding to love that you're receiving from your parents or a parental figure. So this works also if grandparents are basically raising you, or some parental figure needs to be there that you feel love from and that you can respond to. So this is the beginning of your spiritual growth, your emotional development as a person. And there are various things that we need to learn at this stage of life. We need to learn self-discipline, controlling ourselves, right? We need to learn moral conduct, what's right and what's wrong, how to behave properly. learning to take responsibility for your actions, developing your conscience, beginning to listen to and following your conscience. So the thoughts, the voice of your conscience starts off usually being your parents' voice to you. Don't do that, do this. That's your conscience comes out, but eventually comes inside of you. And then even without your parents being there, you hear that voice. So the primary virtues of this stage of life is learning respect and gratitude. If we really have been loved by our parents, taken care of, naturally we will respect our parents and we will be grateful to them for what they have given to us. So I just want, at this point, for you to take a moment. I want you to think about the relationship that you have had with your parents. Okay? Even if you're 60 or 70 years old. Think back to your parents. How was your relationship with your parents? Think about it. Because the nature of that relationship has affected the kind of person you are today. Think about, how did it influence your life? Okay, if I may ask now, please share with your neighbor one thing about your relationship with your parents. Okay, anyway, I hope that you could feel that you feel respect for your parents and gratitude for all the years of investments. So let's move on. The next sphere of love we find in the family, we start developing relationships with others around us. I'm going to take my coat off. Is there a rule I have to wear my coat? Thank you. It's hot up here. Okay. As we grow, so especially in my case, 11 brothers and sisters, you have lots of relationships with others around you. Of course, some families have one child, but anyway, you have peers around, cousins perhaps, or your classmates at school, friends in the neighborhood. So you start developing horizontal relationships with others around you. So this is another kind of love that you're learning to develop through these relationships. It's very different from the relationship with your parents, which is the vertical love. This is horizontal. And as we go older, we start hanging out with our perhaps brothers and sisters, our friends, neighbors, and we're spending a lot more time with them. So naturally, these relationships also are going to impact the kind of person that we're becoming. The nature of these relationships. And these relationships, however, there needs to be a parental presence for these relationships to function properly, to be healthy relationships. How many of you have read the book Lord of the Flies? There's a situation where a bunch of boys, found themselves stranded on an island with no parent, and what happened? They became savages, right? So, again, the parental figure is so important, a person of greater love, greater heart, greater maturity, to help to guide these horizontal relationships. So starting in the family itself, brothers and sisters, I'm sure parents, you've all have experienced having to break up fights, with your children, or, who started it, and sort out situations. You need to be there to help to build harmony in the relationships with one another, because by themselves, it's difficult for children to do that. Children are immature, have not yet developed their heart enough to really, see from the other person's viewpoint, to really be able to step back, get out of themselves. So children still are kind of self-centered, and they need the parental guidance to be able to help them go along the right track. So the goal of this stage is learning harmony in relationships with others. Okay? Learning how to harmonize with others around you, those that are different from you. Still, how to get along with people that are different. So, how many of you have difficulty getting along with certain kinds of people? Even still, perhaps. So this is part of life's challenge. Getting along with people that are not like you. Okay? And of course, in the wider society, it plays out with, in America, we have many different cultures here, many different races, and all kinds of situations. How to get along with people despite these differences. That's one of the big challenges in America today. So, and not only harmony, but also purity in relationships. So as children grow older, they come into their teenage years, they come into puberty, adolescence, then naturally the sexual hormones kick in, and then keeping purity in relationships between the sexes is very important. And again, this is learned, first of all, in the family, through your brothers and sisters. Okay, learning how to love someone of the opposite sex in a pure way, like a brother or a sister. This is one of the things that the family should help us to do. So again, but the parental influence is very important here. So many children, when they become teenagers, if they were not loved by their parents, they feel lack of love, and then instead of loving others for their benefit, they use people for their own benefit. And many times teenagers get into these love relationships, but it's a dysfunctional kind of relationship because they're using that person to receive love from that they did not receive enough from their parents. So this stage of life, this stage is a preparation itself for the next stage, right? So eventually, hopefully, we get married and we are now in this very special relationship with our spouse. How will we relate to our spouse? How much will we be able to really love our spouse? Truly for their benefit and not using them for our own benefit. So, of course, our own parents' example should serve as a model for this, but we ourselves, growing up as we related to, as brothers and sisters, as our neighbors, our classmates, people of the opposite sex, we are learning how to relate with others in a healthy way. So this relationship is one of the most special relationships in our life. It's an exclusive relationship. And of course, it is a sexual relationship. There should be no other relationship in our life like this one. It is not to be shared with anyone else. This is why this person, our partner, truly becomes the other part of ourselves. We have found the other part of ourselves that we were looking for, our better half, right? Much better half. Should be. And together with that person, we become one. And if we truly become one in heart, if we've been able to do that, then we can be very free in that relationship, right? We can be very free with that person. We will do things with that person that we would never, ever do with anyone else. Okay? Because in that relationship, oneness of heart, we are drawing on all the other spheres that are out there. So your spouse sometimes, of course, should be your friend. Is your spouse your friend? But not only that, sometimes you might feel like your spouse, in my case, my wife can be like my mother. Sometimes she treats me She's like my mother, pick up your clothes, you know. Brush your teeth every night. Sometimes she could be like my daughter. She leaves her socks all over the place, actually, so I pick them up for her. So it depends on the situation. So sometimes we're like an elder brother or sister, or we're like a father or a son or mother or daughter with our own spouse, depending on the situation. And what we're learning here, of course, this only happens if there's absolute fidelity and commitment in that relationship. So it's not dependent on feeling. And this is one of the problems today, that people get married and they expect everything to be hunky-dory all the time. And there's always romantic love, candlelights and dancing all the time. It's not like that. So when it's not like that, are you still faithful to that person? Are you still committed to that person, no matter what? If we can do that, then trust is established. You have absolute trust with that person. No matter what the current feeling may be, we can trust that person. And that allows our hearts to be open to that person. We don't have to protect ourselves. We don't have to worry that this person's going to leave me, turn against me. And that allows for love to truly flow. So finally, however, we know this is not the end. This is not the end goal. This itself serves a higher purpose for us to become parents. This is the foundation for parental love. And as we said, the parents really are the center of the family. It's like the sun to the solar system. All the planets revolve around the sun. The children revolve around their parents. The parents are the center. So by that time, hopefully, your heart has developed enough to really be able to truly live for the sake of others, and beginning with your children. So, because parental love is an investment and it seeks benevolence. You seek the benefit of your children. That's the primary thing in your heart and mind. What I can do to help them to grow and develop and become great people themselves, even better than me. So, good parents have that heart, unselfish heart. Parental love is the most unconditional, the most unselfish, most giving of all love. Investment, we know, is for the future. So many times you love, you invest, and you don't see the results many times, often. So I found out that actually it costs, according to studies, it costs $500,000 to raise a child in America. So I don't know if that means it comes from yourself. I know in my case, I don't have that kind of money, but in terms, I guess, of the education expenses, all the costs involved, $500,000 to raise a child. So, and of course, much of that is from your own income that you have invested in them over many, many years. So we don't expect that back, do we? When they grow up 18, now you're an adult. Okay, I've been keeping track, and you owe me $150,000. And so let's make a plan here. How are you going to pay that off over the next 50, 70 years of your life? We don't expect that. So our giving is unconditional. And even if we don't see the results, even if children, sometimes they may not appreciate how much we took care of them, loved them, especially the teenage years, right? So they start going through things, and of course they want more independence, and they don't want their parents around, leave me alone. And and they start developing an attitude, perhaps. But no matter what, we are still there for them, right? Good parents Never abandon your children, no matter what they do, what they say. I came across a quote from Mark Twain about this. So Mark Twain said, "When I was a boy of 14, my father was so ignorant, I could hardly stand to have the old man around. But when I got to be 21, I was astonished at how much he had learned in 7 years." Okay, because the child changed, right? The child realized, became more mature, and then realized, actually, my parents are pretty good. And I was not right. So all of this is all what's happening here in the School of Love. We're developing our hearts and we're developing our character through these relationships in our lives, step by step, going through the 4 spheres of love. So each sphere is the foundation for the next. Our ability to love increases through our success as we go through each sphere. And so in this, it provides us a process to overcome our own needs and desires and learning to live for the sake of others. So we can see character education primarily takes place in the family, okay, not in the school. That can help and support that, but really it's in the family that character education is taking place. And so that's the place where we are learning really about what love is all about. So at the beginning here, at Hundake, we had these quotes from the Bible about love. Okay? Love is the greatest of all virtues. And True Father said in the 21st century will be a century of love. People become more unselfish, more giving for one another. But how is that going to happen? It can only happen if we are able to establish a strong, vibrant marriage and family culture. We have to get back to that. How can we really raise up good marriages and good families? So, as Father's also talked about, the family relationships eventually become the models, the blueprint for our social relationships with others. So we'll meet people around us. Oh, that person's like my own father. That person's like my grandparents. That person's like my child or my brother or sister. We meet people like this. So by learning how to love in our family, we are then learning how to love others around us in the society at large. So we know, when in our blessing, how many of you were in the blessing in 1982? Okay? You remember this picture? Is that a picture? Oh, wrong one. That picture. So the model of our blessing was what? It was right. So through our families, we would be able to change the culture and bring about world peace. So it starts in the family. Peace doesn't just come about by making peace treaties or contracts. It starts on the basis of love. So the more we develop our ability to love, then the more we can be able to establish the basis for peace in our world. So that was our task. If you were there, a lot younger, we didn't really know what we're getting into, how hard it would be. But if you're still here, we tried, right? We really did our best. That's always been in my mind, that our marriage was not just for ourselves, was not even just for our own children, but was for our culture, for our society. And so this is what True Mother wants us to do. How can we find more blessed couples? But not just in name, not just saying the words or drinking the holy wine, but practicing, doing the things that is required to really make peace, starting in our family and with our relationships around us. So I just wanted to finish by reading. My wife and I in Hyundai K yesterday, we came across this passage which speaks to this. Father said, according to God's principle of creation, the kingdom of heaven must be perfected first in this earthly world. Originally, God created us such that after living in the kingdom of heaven on earth, while in the flesh, we naturally would discard our physical body, move to the kingdom of heaven in the spirit world, and live eternally. Then what should the kingdom of heaven, which we need to construct on earth, look like? The original family and the kingdom of heaven have the same structure. Basically, in a family, there are original parents, original husband and wife, original children, and original brothers and sisters. When this family becomes one, centered on true love, harmony, and unity, come about automatically. On that foundation, with true love, true life, and true lineage woven together, they can take on an even higher purpose. If human beings had not fallen, they would have become the perfected true children of God, with God as their parent and His true love at the center of their lives. Perfected human beings were to form the bond of true husband and wife, surrounded by God's love, give birth to and raise true children. Together they were to establish the kingdom of heaven on earth and live together there. And then, with their entire family, they would one day live in the kingdom of heaven in heaven with your family. The kingdom of heaven is a place where the family enters together and lives in an eternal realm of peace. Accordingly, God can settle His ideal of creation only where heaven has been made real in a family on earth. This is where God longs to dwell. Thank you very much.